as an increase in revenue to the basic ed funding. And my suggestion, and that's just a suggestion, it's the board's decision, but my suggestion would be that we would add equivalent dollars in the transportation equipment line item for bus purchases. And we begin to build that line item up so that we're not using reserves to pay for the buses. I mean, it's really not an option when you have I think when we're looking at a fleet of vehicles as old as the fleet of vehicles we have, that it's really not an option to not do something to continue to move these old vehicles out and put our kids in newer, safer vehicles. I mean, I'm not saying that those vehicles aren't safe. I mean, they're maintained. The mechanics are all, they do a great job. But those vehicles are just getting to end of life. You know, they're over 15 years old and they have over 200,000 miles on them, and they just wear out. You know, the wheelchair lifts, things like that. Those things, they have a lifespan, and we're getting there. So we need to actively continue that process of moving those old vehicles out and replacing them. So that would be my recommendation as your business manager or your business administrator. But now in the end, the 9 of you vote. So I take my lead from you.
What I was hoping we could do would be, and it came up right off the bat, the fund balances. Go through what we're looking at, maybe have questions of where we came from, how we got to where we are, and then after we get done with that, discuss the future of those fund balances, like as our last thing. Go through this budget because they're a little hefty in my opinion. I mean, it's not out of line, but we have that Peasers fund. Is that one of them that was in there?
Yeah.
I'm not on that page right now, but and I don't want to go off on this tangent just yet. But that's some money that we really never spent,
Right.
For what it was intended for.
We're
So that might be something that we'll discuss it and see what board members' thoughts are on where we want to go with those fund balances.
on page 28 is what Mr. Casper is speaking about, and actually we're showing in the current year about $2.5 million use of that line item, and that is the line item that was used to basically to balance the 15-16 budget. So again, Mr. Casper, like I said, if everything happened the way it was budgeted, that line item is going to go down.
I have a question on page, I think it's your 8th slide. I'm trying to make sure I understand how this happened. I ran down to 28 there. Hold on. So last year's 15-16 final had a negative balance of $3.4 million.
Correct.
So then in 16-17, and so explain to us again, I'm a little confused right now. We're taking the funding in holiday. We already took that. We haven't not paid that yet. We're not going to pay it this year. Is that right, for the benefits?
For the benefits. What will happen is this year in 15-16, for 2 months, we will not transfer the funds over from the general fund to the health insurance fund, and we also will not show expenditures for those 2 months.
Is that part of your 3.2 in this slide? Is that why you had that negative? Because you were expecting to still have that money? Did you budget as if we were going to continue? That's where I got lost there.
No, I did not budget as we would continue to use the health insurance fund balance to pay for health insurance costs. I budgeted to pay the entire year of 16-17 with the budget.
So those 2 months are not really part of that number?
They're part of the 15-16 budget deficit. If that holiday wouldn't have been put into the budget, that $3.4 million would be $2 million higher.
Okay, so there's where you're losing me. So of that 3.4, those 2 months actually went to pay that.
They went to
back to the 15, 16.
They went to,
Where the 2 months we didn't pay, where did Mrs. Johnson stick that money? That's what I'm trying to find out. That's where you're losing me.
Okay, what, by not paying those 2 months, Mrs. Johnson decreased the expenditure line from 129 million to 127 million. Okay, if she would not have
Got it.
done that,
Thank you.
I'm sorry, you can show slide 19, and it will explain this 2 million.
What is the holiday back?
We didn't pay. We didn't fund
We
it.
didn't transfer money.
Let me ask Sean, so when we talk about, or when it's, the phrase that we coined around here was a holiday.
Yeah.
So that just means we didn't transfer tax revenue into our health insurance claims fund. We took a break on that because that fund had gotten large enough that it exceeded, what we thought. We took a risk, basically. So we have enough in here to fund catastrophic losses. So we took a few months off, and we used that money somewhere else. And that's probably another fund we're going to talk about. I mean, I think you mentioned it here somewhere. So that's another one that it's not as big as it used to be, but it's still probably, bigger than a private company would carry. That's just my opinion.
Our actual cost for health insurance is about $1 million a month. That's medical, drug, stop-loss insurance, administrative fees, everything wrapped in there. About $1 million equates to about $12 million a year. So in the 15-16 budget, it was budgeted, those line items were budgeted at $10 million instead of $12 million. So for basically what we're going to do is we're going to take $10 million of funds from the 15-16 year, put them over into the health insurance fund to pay claims. Theoretically, when we will know that the actual numbers come in, but our history shows us that that'll cost about $12 million. So we're going to draw down that fund, and that fund at the end of 14-15, had about $8.5 million in. So the theory is to draw that, you're going to draw that down by about $2 million, so we should have about $6.5 million at the end of this fiscal year. And our third-party administrator, his coaching to me is that a safe number is about 6 months worth of cost in there. That's roughly about $6 million of funding. Now that's his theory. The board certainly can have their own theory, and we can, work to implement the board's theory. But I think that is that is the understanding I have of the situation now. So what happened, if you look at slide 19, we took the 200 line employee benefits from a $30.2 million budget up to a $33.8 million. And like I said, that impact is two things. $2 million basically in the retirement increase, and then $1.5 million for the insurance, because I budgeted 12 months of insurance. So you would think, well, that should be $2 million. But what that's showing you, why it's only $1.5 million, is it's showing you the impact on the rates. The new insurance program has driven the rates down, and basically has driven down what we budgeted. So that's why you're not seeing an increase of $2 million there. You're seeing an increase of $1.5 million on the insurance side. So the new plans are starting to work as far as they've driven the rates down. Now, what we just need is we need time for claims to come through, and for the claims to be evaluated and so forth, to see where the new trends are, and to see what the impact then on the claims. And hopefully what we'll see is claims being driven down also, and then we can continue to drive those costs down. So and we're in the infancy of that. That plan's only been in place since January 1st, and it takes a while for claims to come through. So they're just starting to see claims for the beginning of this process. So it's going to take a little while.
So what he's talking about, I think, is that we have implemented a deductible.
Yes, sir.
We're hoping to see the positive trend of that, you know, or the positive effect of those deductibles. Is that what
Yes, sir.
that's the-
You hit the nail on the head.
And based on that, then you would start to decrease that amount that you're keeping in there from 6.5 million?
What we would do is, if the claims are coming down, is we would have a corresponding decrease in what we would budget as premiums to lower our annual expense for health insurance, which would reduce what we're putting over into that fund. So,
It's kind of backwards. You look at your claims and then you come up with your rate versus a private insurer who gives you the rate and then buys an island with the rest of the money.
Sean, I have a question related to the insurance. Can you evaluate where we are this year? You said we had 8.5 million projected end of year fund balance for the insurance fund was 6.5 million. Is it still too soon to tell where we're going to end up, or?
I met with Steve Allen 2 weeks ago, and I met with Steve Allen on Friday. He's showing me projections of right around $12 million for total claims. And he's saying that he's being conservative in his projections, because the last thing he wants to show me is 12 million and it comes in at 13 million. So he would rather, show me 12 million and it come in at 11 and a half or something like that. Yes, I think to answer your question, I think we'll probably see that $2 million decrease in that funding reserve. But we have a few more months to go, and hopefully, these 6 months of the deductible plan is going to have a positive impact on that and drive that total claim number down. I think he wants to show me that, but I think it's just too early in he just doesn't have enough of numbers yet, Mrs. Yardley, to lead him to be able to actually, feel concrete. But
So when, is it a few months after the fiscal year ends? So maybe in September, you'll know what the final result is of the year?
Yeah, because you have run-out claims for a few months,
Mm-hmm.
and in the health insurance claims, so it takes a good 90, 120 days at least to see those. Each month the run-outs go down, of course, but it's going to take a little bit for us to get those final numbers.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
The increase in regular ed on page 23, is that a combination of what we're seeing in the presentation from curriculum and technology? Is that where that increase comes from?
Yes, those numbers, the one-to-one lease numbers, all that equipment for the kids would all roll up into that 1,100 function, so that would have an impact on that number. You would also see an impact on that number in the 200 line item for your benefit cost, because you would have that's where the bulk of your teacher salaries is in that 1,100 line item. So a bulk of your increase in retirement is going to land there, and a lot of your increase in the benefit, the medical and the prescription, is going to land there, because that's where the bulk of our people are. It is in that 1,100 line item. So anything that impacts the budget, you'll see it magnified in that line item.
On page 19, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
On page 19,
Uh-huh.
for example, I'm just wondering, going through this, is it possible to get an idea of why certain things are increased from last year and why certain things are decreased from last year, what that's attributed to?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Pulling them, I'm not going to give you a great answer by pulling them off my head right now.
No, that's fine. That was just for the future.
Yep.
Okay, thanks.
I think an instructive comment that you made about this on page 19, the employee benefits increasing, the fact that we took a holiday, basically used fund balance last year to cover money, has to be built back in this year. And that always happens when you use fund balance. It's a hazard that I don't think a lot of people realize, but it comes back each and every time.
That's absolutely, Dr. Yarnell, and that same thing that you just said falls right back to that fund balance page where we looked at that non-routine maintenance and the transportation and those line items that were actually, they have to get back into the budget and be paid for with revenues. So when you take them out and you use fund balance for them, eventually that savings account dries up and you've got to put them back in and use your annual revenues to pay for your annual expenses. And that's the goal of Dr. Radican and I, is to shift that use away from fund balance and to build these actual things into the budget. And as we move forward and we stop getting those huge increases in PSERs, which you guys have been so used to. I mean, every year for the last 5 years, 6 years, it's all you've heard is you got another $2 million in PSERs, another $2 million. It's sucking up everything that you had in order to budget. It sucked up all your free dollars. So, and anything that you saved went in that line item. So when that finally gets under control, hopefully you get back to a system of being able to fund things that you need on an annual basis and move forward in a more positive light instead of constantly having to cut things and reduce line items and so forth. And the great news in this budget is what we talked about with Mrs. DeBona, is that we were actually able to add teachers within this budget and expand educational opportunities for kids, not only in the high school, but in the ESL program. That's great news to finally be able to do that as a school district. I mean, that's actually been unheard of throughout the state for a number of years.
And to piggyback on what Mr. Dahlberg just said, I think slide 30 at least really stands out to me. It makes it look like the red line, like, okay, great, the percentage change is really going down, and isn't that wonderful? But if you look at those blue bars, as Mr. Dahlberg said, you still have to pay a good amount in PSERs. That number doesn't change, it just doesn't increase as much as it has been in the last, say, 5 years.
On page 15, slide 15. There's red ink there,
Yes.
state property tax allocation. When will you know about that? Are you not going to know about that, or no one knows?
We are. Oops. Mr. Casper, we are supposed to know May 1st what that allocation will be, and that information will come from the Department of Education, and then we will also receive from the Bucks County Assessment Office the list of approved farmsteads, and then we will calculate how much is available per homestead farmstead. And throughout the finishing process of the budget, you'll have a resolution to pass regarding homestead farmstead exemption, so forth. So it will be done the same way that you've done it for the last number of years. So, and again, whatever that number is, if it's $2.3 million, a corresponding decrease will happen in the real estate revenue line item of $2.3 million. It's a dollar for dollar switch.
Anybody have any more questions while Sean's up there at the podium? I just wanted to say, so far, thank you. You've told us about your systemic change back to budgeting instead of borrowing for us. We had a little poll of everyone to give you some help to get to this budget. We saw enough support to at least budget to the Act 1. And so here's where we're at tonight. And how would you like to go about it? How do you guys want to go about talking about these funds, like future ideas? I mean, Sean puts them in there. I think at the end there, you gave us your thoughts. Maybe we could all just, give our thoughts on transportation came up. I mean, I guess we bought buses one out of the last 4 years, I forget, or was it 3 years?
I believe it was one on the last, was it 4 star, you know, or 3?
Not sure.
It's at least 3.
At least,
Yeah.
So I asked some people besides Sean, what do you do when you have, you set money aside for one use and then you have this large fund left? And, I'm talking about the PSERS stabilization account. And each of the people I asked said, well, that's a good, when you have that, something they would normally consider is for, one-time grow in factory, one-time large expenditures. So for me, the first thing that popped in my head and I'll start the discussion real fast. I would like to see us dedicate some portion of some fund and go into that transportation. And I forget if, how many, I don't know if I was here for his presentation, but I don't think he asked us for any new buses this year, did he? Mr. Geiger?
Yes.
He did?
He is assuming and asking for a replenishment process that we would replenish the buses about 10 buses a year, so that every 10 years we are turning the fleet over, so that it is so we don't get these buses that have such huge mileage on them. So yes, he did. He is.
So these are tax dollars we've already collected, and if there's things that, if there's a use for these funds, then, you have to guide us, we have to talk to each other and find a way to, not implement that rotational process and keep increasing taxes, because there is a light next year and the following year. So that's just my basic thought on the funds. I don't know if anybody else has any thoughts on them. The balances they're not on here, or they are somewhere? I think I saw them somewhere.
Of the fund balance reserves?
Slide 28. And maybe that means moving them around. I mean, that's where you come in. I don't know if you take, do you just terminate the PSERS stabilization fund? Do you just put it someplace else? What do we do with that thing? Since we're not used, so you've now taken, because these are tax dollars already collected. And now you built back, and now we're asking for more tax dollars to systemically change and put PSERS in the operation budget, not in this. So we're kind of did both there for a couple of years. So I think it's time to not do both.
The board has those dollars committed for PSERS. In its annual resolution, the board can choose to commit those dollars change that commitment and commit those dollars for whatever purpose it wishes. So that's a very easy and doable thing to do, Mr. Casper. It's just whatever the board's wishes are, we just put that into our annual resolution for committing fund balance, and we can move forward with that.
I'm just wondering, with our increase in the PSERS expenses this year, why can't we take some of that and apply it to those increases, since that's what it was there for in the first place?
You can, theoretically you can, but next year then you have to fund next year's increase and this year's increase. So each year you do that, the next year you have a bigger hole to fill in. So the best thing you can do is fund those increases as you go and not dig yourself a deficit.
Then what's the point in the fund? You know what I mean? Because
I
you're going to have that argument every single year then,
I
I just feel like you're holding that money there.
One of the points is,
Yeah.
looking back, we have 20/20 vision. But when we started doing this, we didn't know what was going to happen, because we saw that arrow in front of us. So now, we taxed, that's what I tried to just articulate was, we funded it and we raised taxes too. Now it's time to, it's time we can stop, so.
Well, we did use it.
That was the path we went down. We we agreed to back in whatever year that was.
We did use it last year to balance the budget.
Yes.
So it was
We
used.
did, right?
Yes, you're correct. A chunk of that money has been used in this year to balance this year's budget, yes.
But that's your point overall, that we can't go forward doing that. It's not solving the problem of our budget, it's just, we're putting a Band-Aid on it. So Megan, what you're saying, I agree with what Barry's saying. We have those funds there. I don't think that the right thing is to use that funding just to balance this budget. It has to be what Mr. Daubert's saying, our revenues and expenses, our revenues should cover our budget. So that being said, we have that PSERS fund. We're looking at other things that are one-time expenses or, things that need funding in this way, like the buses. What you're saying, to take the money out of the PSERS fund and cover this year's increase, is basically what we've been doing, is it not?
That's correct.
Call it whatever you want to call it, covering a budget deficit, covering a PSERS increase. That's what you were doing, and I think that's what we're ultimately trying to get away from here.
That's correct.
I get what you're saying about it compounding each year, but whether you say I'm applying it to PSERS or I'm applying it to buses, you're still applying it and you're still dropping how much money you're spending, and then next year you're going to increase it because that's what happens every single year. So I just don't see the difference. Well,
The
as
difference
opposed to
is-
letting it sit in there and then raising taxes to cover it while it's sitting in that account.
The difference is that you apply it to something that's long-term as opposed to short-term year to year. And the classic example around here of that is all the elementary schools were the renovations in the 2007 to 2013-14 timeframe were funded through transfers into that of savings, basically, fund balance. And this could be used that way too. But there, if you put a roof on a building, it should last 20 or 30 years. It's not something you have to build into each year's budget. It's not like hiring a teacher, because you hire that person 1 year and then you pay for them for the next 30.
I think that the goal, what you're saying, Dr. Cornell, is to pay for your annual expenses with your annual revenues. That's the goal, moving forward.
Yeah, I think Mr. Casper asking what we should do with that money, so I think we should consider transportation. I also think we should consider what the buildings need and what needs to be done, and have that discussion before we decide. And one thing I think that needs to be considered, it's going to be a huge expense, is air conditioning. So, we end up closing the elementary schools for the weather, and
We don't have to decide
Yeah.
tonight with this stuff, but this was like the first segue into it. I can't remember us ever having this discussion.
yeah, but I just think that's my suggestion, to have it when we should consider transportation, and we should consider building needs.
I understand what everybody's saying, but in my mind, I still can't get past the fact that we're sitting here talking about how we can't afford to pay our budget and we have to raise taxes this year, and then, hey, we have this extra money, let's figure out how we can spend it. You know what I mean? Like, I get your point.
No,
I
and
do
I
get your
get, and I
point.
totally get your point, but what comes back to hindsight 2020, that's a great problem we have to deal with there. That didn't just happen to land there. It was painful to get to that. That was all of it. The benefit thing is sort of a little bit of luck and a little bit of strategy. A lot of luck, a little strategy. The systemic change is, we're sitting here talking about fund balances of $13 million, which is a pretty good place to be, and maybe another 6 in our self-funded account, which our rates have gone up 1.9% a year for the last 3 years, or something less than that even, versus the marketplace is going up 35, 40, 23%. So, it's a lot of, I'm not trying to get into an argument. We got here through some painful decisions, and now we get to look back and say, all right, we're in a pretty decent place. We have to do better now. We can't keep going forward taxing and and letting these funds get this large. So that's why we're having the conversation. I just think it's, and because you're new on the board, I think that you don't really know the history of how we got to this. Because there was a lot of battles here every year to get to this. And, you know, so I'm not patting us on the back. I'm just saying that it's a lot easier to look back and say, oh, we have this 8 million. How did we get that money?
I'd like to say this isn't pain-free either, because the principals have made cuts, we've made some personnel cuts. This is not a pain-free balance here that we have.
Even this year, right?
That's what I'm saying, yeah. This year.
And remember, we're not there yet as far as, we don't have all the annual expenses built in yet. We got a good start on it this year. And, you know, with the index, you know, we came into a balanced, much better situation as far as being able to balance the budget. But we don't have it all there yet. We still need that transportation piece to take care of on an annual basis. So, you know, figuring out what to do with the fund balances and things like that may be a little bit premature this year, because we're still not there yet 100%. You know, of building in all those normal annual expenses that we need to have. So
I think going forward, though, you're going to have a chance to do it, and maybe even so this year. Some of these numbers might come back. You may balance us at 2.0. I mean, all of us agreed to go to, I mean, I think everyone almost said, yeah, we'll go to that index. But if you can find a way to come in under it, I don't think you're going to get an argument there either. And, you know, some of us want to go all the way further for exceptions. But that's why we're having this kind of discussion. I think this is one of the best discussions we ever had about the budget since I've been here. With all due respect to everybody, at least we're talking about it. And it's hard to talk about it because everything you say can come back to bite you. So you have to like take your chances, and you pay your money and take your chances.
I'm just wondering too, we do have some of this stuff that you're talking about already built into this budget, though. We have bus costs in here, we have maintenance costs built in here for Mr. Loeffler, for different.
there's no buses in there
That's
yet.
why we're talking about, there's no bus there.
Well, but what about the proposal that Brian Geiger had given us that does call for buses next year?
He wants them.
But
He's
you,
asking
okay,
for
but it's
them.
not budgeted for it, I understand.
But to get to the to use the 2.4% increase and to balance the budget, I didn't have enough room to put bus expenditures in. The only way to do that is to use fund balance, to reserve fund balance, to use capital projects funds, or if the state does come through with some more money after we see what happens with the last little fight there in Harrisburg over the funding formula, and we do receive another few $100,000, that money would add to the revenue side and could be added to the expense side under the line item for buses. So there's some ways to get at it, but we're not there yet.
When Mr. Geiger gave his presentation about, you know, when he thought it was best to be turning over these buses at, you know, so many years, he had mentioned that the cost for maintaining older buses starts to exceed the cost of purchasing new buses. So I'm wondering, I would like to see those numbers, number one, and number two, if that is the case, that we're at a point where some of our expenses are going to exceed purchasing new buses, then we're going to end up paying more money anyway by keeping the old buses based on what he was saying. Do you know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So then, you know, we're going to end up spending more money. So somewhere that money comes from somewhere. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, you have to repair those. You have to repair the buses, the fleet we have, and as the buses get older, repair costs go up. It's just like your car. Either you have the great period when you're under warranty. Not a lot happens, but if it does happen, it gets covered. Same thing with the buses. And then you start to get down the road where you start to get 150,000 miles on, then things really, big ticket things go wrong, like transmissions and rear ends and things like that go wrong that cost you $4,000 or $5,000 to fix instead of, whatever it costs to change the oil in a bus, $100. I don't know. But, so that, those are the things that start to happen with those. And the other thing that he is specifically pointing out to me is that with the buses that have the lifts on them, those lifts, they up and down numerous times a day, they take a lot of wear and tear. And eventually those lifts wear out, and they're a very expensive item to keep maintained and so forth. So you have those impacts that drive the cost of maintaining a fleet. And yeah, I mean, at some point, you cut your losses and you get rid of those old buses, and you bring in new buses that are under warranty and that you have a 5-year warranty on. And if you can get into a rhythm of rotation that you're turning the whole fleet over every 10 years, and you have 5 years under warranty, and then you only have 5 years where you have to fund the expenses, you can drive down your maintenance costs. But when you have buses that are 15, 16, 17, 18 years old that have 250,000 miles on it, they're going to cost to maintain. So it's just like, having the old car in the driveway that costs you $400 every month because everything it keeps breaking down. But so that's what we're looking at. It's the same scenario.
Sean?
Yes, sir.
I don't want to disagree with any of your numbers out there on the buses, but I looked at the numbers for maintenance and repair costs on the last go-round when we bought the 10 buses this year, and they were not that exorbitant, and seemed pretty much in line with what I would expect. I've also read a few white papers on bus replacement intervals, and it seems that, to me, that the recommended intervals are around 15 years and 250,000 miles. So from a bus perspective, aside from the lifts, which I agree with you, probably get used hard and a lot of wear and tear, I think our fleet is of an age where we do need to turn it over on a routine basis.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, and to go to your point, Mr. Kraus, after our new purchases this year, we still have 8 buses that are older than year 2000. So there's 16 years or older. So we have that, we have that 8, 10 buses that are at that, older than what you're, what you're saying. So
I agree with you, and that's why I'd be supportive of moving some of this into transportation.
Okay, well, that stuff we have time to do yet, because I think we're just going to get 10 new buses any day now, right? So let's get over that.
I heard some of them are in.
There you are. So any other questions before we go to public comment? Because I think we have another meeting after this, right? So I think, thanks, Sean. We meet again in 2 weeks.
yeah, May 2nd.
We'll have some updates after the 1st, and we'll see. We'll keep moving forward. Everybody good up here? Okay. Any public comment? Mr. Linden or Mrs. Furlong?
I'll make one.
Mr. Linden.
What's your total audience tonight? 6 minutes? You give us 3 minutes each, so that's a total of 6 minutes for public comment. Very generous. Thank you.
Okay, I guess that's it then. So this meeting's adjourned, and we meet in the other room.